Okay, for the sake of time, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much and good afternoon to everyone. Thank you for being here. As a quick reminder, please check your registration info for the link to Slido. That is where we're going to be gathering questions. We will have time at the end of the session for a Q&A, but please feel free to drop questions in there throughout the presentation. So today we're going to do a big broad brushstroke over student affairs in the online environment. There's always so much to discuss and obviously not enough time to do it in. I'm sorry if you're hearing that dinging in the background. But I am going to focus today on topics that it will cover hopefully most of the student affairs departments that you all work in. I'm very excited to talk with you about my journey from traditional higher education to a completely online and remote educational environment at Lambda School, and hopefully give you some things to think about and implement as you continue to navigate taking your physical campus online. So let's go ahead and jump in. While we have limited time, I do think it's really important that you get to know me a bit to understand where I'm coming from and how I approach my work. So in attending a lot of webinars and conferences, I'm always the type of person that used to have the mantra of why me, and have really shifted into a why not me. And so with that, here I am. I'm very excited to step a bit out of my comfort zone to share with you all what I've learned. So a bit about me. For the resume things, I have 13 plus years in traditional higher education and student affairs. I started my work in residence life as an RA, a grad hall director, a hall director, and area coordinator. I switched over to student conduct as a senior coordinator and a liaison to residence life, and then transitioned into a director of conduct role at two different institutions where I was a one-woman show, being the only staff member in student conduct. I've also worked at public and private universities, from small private liberal arts colleges to mid-size and large public universities. With that out of the way, I think it's important that you have some additional context about me. So with that, I am a granddaughter whose late grandmother went back to school as a single mom with 6 children to get her teaching certificate. I'm the daughter of a mother who didn't care for school and a father who was almost finished with his associate's degree when he got married and had me. I'm the sister of a brother who had a dream of becoming a firefighter, but didn't like school and decided that 18 months of the fire science program was too much. I am the cousin, niece, and granddaughter of many family members for which traditional higher education was not their path, and for some of them have continued to question and do not understand why I need so much education. Traditional higher education, though, however, was my path. I knew very early on that going to college was a dream of mine because I wanted to go, and because I wanted to become a teacher, and the teachers need those degrees. As a family and consumer sciences vocational teaching major, I learned early on that traditional higher education was not the path for everyone, and that's okay. This is a good thing. There are multiple ways for people to get successful and fulfilling careers, and the majority of my family was living proof of that. During my student teaching experience, I remember sitting in the teacher's break room at a junior high school. We were having a conversation over lunch when one of the teachers began talking about her son wanting to go to technical school. She was frustrated and upset that he would want to do that. Only a college or university degree would be good enough in her eyes. Vocational schools were less than, not good enough, and she believed he would never make it in a world where she believed you needed a degree. This conversation really shaped me and has continued to live with me for 15 years after. I've always wanted to help students find, explore, and make their dreams a reality. And I wanted people to have a path towards careers that fulfill them and support their families, regardless of traditional or non-traditional path to get there. As I continued my journey in higher education, I felt myself leaning more and more in that direction. I wanted to be a part of a different kind of education, and then I found Lambda School. Lambda's mission of unlocking potential, regardless of circumstance, really resonated with me. In September of 2019, I transitioned to Lambda School, which is completely online and remote. We do not have any students in a physical location together. I had to learn quickly how to transition all of student affairs into the online world with a small team, not individual departments. As our team continues to grow, we're able to fine-tune more and more the student experience and how we support our students through their journeys. I've learned a lot in a short amount of time, and I'm hoping that in this world of COVID-19 and taking your work to the remote world and online, I can share what I've learned with you who are all learning how to navigate this now. Most of all the webinars and articles I've seen during this time have centered around how to teach online, and I see all over my social media that many of you are trying to figure out how to do student affairs without a lot of help, and I'm hoping this will help a little. While I don't think I can solve everything or answer every question, my goal in our time together today is to give you a starting point and ideas to consider as you determine what will work best for you and your community. Starting us off, you may be looking at Lambda and my title and wonder, what in the world is student success? At Lambda, it basically means most of student affairs. My team includes, but is not limited to, academic advising, accessibility, student conduct, compliance, career services, dean of students, student-facing communication, crisis management, the info center, retention, and more. So as you can see, I transitioned from a specialty in residence life and conduct to most all of it. And in the past 7 months, I have been on a wildly challenging and fulfilling time and a really big growth period for me. I have and continue to learn day in and day out. Please know also that I have an amazing team of staff that work on that list that I just mentioned. And there's a lot of cross-functional leadership and support that happens day in, day out to help our students. For our agenda, I tried to narrow it down a bit, as I tend to go overboard with the amount of information that I try to pack into a presentation. I'm sure you can relate. So I have narrowed it down to 3 basic areas, and that is community building, policies and procedures, and crisis management. I feel like if we do a big broad brushstroke with many of these, that they can translate regardless of the specific department that you're working in. Before we dive in, I do want to give a quick disclaimer. First, the things that I'm going to talk about today are things that have worked for Lambda School and me in my transition from campus life to online life. That doesn't mean it's going to work for you or your institution. This is definitely not a one-size-fits-all model, and I'm just hoping to give you some ideas to get you going and thinking differently about moving from a physical to an online space. At Lambda, we're still growing and learning as well, and we continue to fine-tune how we do student success, what community and support looks like in the online and remote environment. The good news here is that there are so many tools and resources out there that if you need to be online longer than anticipated, there's help. We have an hour total today, 30 minutes for my presentation and 30 for Q&A. I know we're not going to be able to cover everything and we're barely scratching the surface. So please do feel free to contact me via email if there are questions. I'm happy to help in any way that I possibly can. As we go through this, there are some lessons that I've learned that I think that are important to get us started. Number 1, pack an umbrella. I am a detail-oriented person and I tend to overanalyze and prepare for the worst and hope for the best in all situations. So also being from Washington State, I've learned that if you often pack an umbrella, the rain's going to stay away at least most of the time. Number 2, try not to reinvent the wheel. You may feel like your world or your work has been turned upside down at this point, but remember that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Just modify to make it fit. Higher ed has prepared me well for my current role, and you all have really good foundational things in place to help you move to online. You just really need to dig in and be thoughtful and intentional with the modifications. Some things may only work in a physical space, which is okay, but some are primed for online. Number 3, be realistic. While in this online remote world is permanent for me, this is your temporary. I know that tradition in higher education is huge, and as you know, that comes with its own pros and cons. Now is a time to determine what's worth it and not. Big traditional events such as commencement have been canceled, but there are things that you can be doing in an online space to celebrate. It just takes some thought, planning, collaboration, and creativity. Be realistic about timelines and what you can do. While the timeline for opening campuses back up is up in the air, they will open again at some point. So be realistic about what you want to accomplish in the next couple of months. I would also add this, and that is to be kind to yourself. We are in this together and none of us know how this is going to be or how long it's going to be or when it will ever get back to normal. I've been telling our students in pretty much every announcement that I make to be kind to yourself and others. The world needs more of this right now. And I say it to you all because as a student affairs person, I know that we love to say this kind of thing to our students, but we have a hard time practicing it in our own lives, especially the kindness to ourselves. So please give yourself space to breathe in this uncertain time. And as my favorite Brene Brown says, this is a TFT, a terrible first time. This is the time for many of you that is a first for taking your campuses online. This is the first time you're trying to put not just your department online, but all employees being remote and separate as well. There's also a lot of firsts happening right now, and it's important for us to take a breath and hopefully laugh a little. Every first time is a little terrible, but as we learn and grow, it gets easier and better. Finally, divide and conquer. The good news is that hopefully you still have a lot of staff that are able to help. So please don't take the world upon your shoulders. Communicate and share the love and share the load. The first thing I want to cover is community building with you. One thing that was really hard for me to transition was the idea of place. I had a belief that if I'm not on a physical campus, there can't be a community, or at least not a thriving one. That online education is very transactional, that you come in, you watch the pre-recorded lecture, you post in the discussion board, you turn in your assignment and leave. And that having students literally all over the country and world means that true connections, bonds, and relationships could not be formed. I am happy to report that I was very, very wrong. Lambda's online, but every lecture is live and interactive. Students are expected to be in class at specific times. We have student leaders, which are kind of a mix between an RA and a TA, to describe it to my student affairs folks. They help with our students throughout their journey at Lambda. Side note, my colleague Britt Tedeschi will be leading a webinar next week about how we do near peer learning with our TLs and SLs. So please look into that if that is of interest to you. We also use Slack, where we have academic, social, and administrative channels for learning, building community, and sharing interests. We use Slack for students to submit tickets to what we call front desk, which is kind of a catch-all info center for questions, concerns, or requests that students may have. We do monthly meetups where students gather to build community face-to-face and not just behind a computer screen. These obviously have been taken into the virtual world right now, but we still do them. Even in the remote learning environment, we are having to shift some things and think creatively for traditional programs. We have Lambda talent shows and contests, costume contests. We celebrate job placement. We have regular school-wide announcements that are informative, have updates, and are fun in nature. Most of the time, they're not all three at the same time, but you get the picture, and much more. While it is a shift, online is your campus now, and it's okay that it doesn't look the same. We just need to pivot our thinking about what community could look like, not what it always has looked like. I would like you to ask yourself, what is one thing that my department does that has a positive impact on students that we're not doing now because it's not traditionally online? Now ask yourself, how can you take that online? What would need to change? What could stay the same? What do you need to make it happen? And are there people that you can collaborate with to make it happen? Some of it's tools, and some of it's thinking outside of the box without getting too in your head about it. I know that is something I do often. So don't try to do it all or do it all at once. Break it into manageable chunks. Think about what levers to pull to get the biggest results rather than trying to recreate your entire campus online. So for example, what would make the biggest impact on your campus? Is it figuring out how to do announcements to students or creating spaces for students to connect and set up social spaces? There's no right or wrong answer to that, and the answer may be both or neither. I would just think about some of those things and think about how you can break them up and prioritize them based on your campus and your student needs. With community building, I want to encourage you to start thinking creatively about how you can replicate, modify, or create new ways for students to connect. Students are confused, they're scared and worried, and while some of them are okay in this uncertain environment, some of them are craving that normalcy. They're craving structure and they're craving people and things that they had on your campus. An example of this is when we took a break for COVID-19 at the end of March. While we were already in the online environment, it was very clear that our students were feeling their children being at home, being in isolation, and living with uncertainty. So we took an impromptu break. During that time, we wanted to balance the needs of our students. So some, while they wanted to have a true break to unplug, relax, and learn how to live with this new normal, some of our students definitely wanted to keep going because Lambda's cadence and schedule helped them to have that normalcy in their life. So our teams came together and planned. We had Lambda Kids coding workshops, coffee social hours, a hackathon project that had the theme of Mr. Rogers looking for the helpers, a job search party, and now in the next couple of weeks, we're having a talent show. None of these activities existed prior, but now might actually get put into rotation because they were so successful and we thought outside of the box. I tell you this to encourage you to think outside of the box. My takeaway for you around community building is to think of ways that your department alone or in collaboration with others can create opportunities for your students to connect and build community on a regular basis outside of the classroom. Next, I want to show you a couple of quick examples of how we use announcements to get information out there to our students. One thing to think about is the platform in which you engage on a regular basis and how you want students to engage back with you for questions, feedback, and comments. Our announcements are all done through Slack and have a thread attached where we can keep track of student comments and questions. This is an example from last week where we announced our upcoming talent show. Here's also an example of an announcement when COVID-19 started ramping up. As you can see, our students love emojis, and Slack is good for that. If you do end up using Slack or a similar type of tool, I would just encourage, especially my conduct friends in the room, to make sure that you have a review process for the emojis that are created and pop up to make sure they're appropriate for the environment. Finally, here are two more examples of what we're moving more towards. So just like you, we have to fight off students not reading everything or becoming numb to the information. I know when I was in residence life, I fought this with posters in the hall, and now I'm fighting it with announcements in Slack. So we are beginning to explore more attractive ways and concise ways that we can convey information to our students. The other way that's not pictured here is that we're looking at how to do that through video format as well. If you do not have or use Slack with your students, I know many of you have a great social media presence, so think about ways that you can come together and lean on each other's followers to get information out there to students in a way that they're going to receive and attract them to engage. I still follow my Women of Student Conduct Facebook group, and I know those in student conduct in this call are probably going to giggle a little bit with my story I'm about to share, because as they are learning, just because you're in the online environment and not on a physical campus doesn't mean the behavior changes and the behavioral issues that we have changed. So right before I left my last position, one of the last couple of conduct cases I had involved roommate dynamics, drugs in the freezer, and a vandalized table. And upon leaving, I really thought to myself, oh my gosh, I'm so excited because I'm not going to have to deal with that ever again, which is really cute looking back. So just because you're in the online space and not on a physical campus does not mean, as I'm sure you are well aware, that conduct and behavioral changes or behavioral issues disappear. The good news is that even outside of the conduct arena, most departments will not need to change their policies or procedures. They just need to pivot and modify. So now is the time to take a good look at your internal and external policies and procedures, even outside of conduct, and see what can stay the same and what needs to be modified and what is missing. At Lambda, just like you, we have policies and procedures around orientation, career services, attendance policies, academic integrity, ADA accommodations, verification of enrollment, conduct meetings, conflict management, investigations, crisis response, and more. And for my conduct friends, there are things you need to think about more broadly and how your existing policies cover the online space. So things like alcohol, drugs, and weapons on video and Zoom calls, intoxication in class, vaping, smoking, or chewing tobacco in Zoom, harassment, discrimination, bullying, academic integrity, and more. My biggest piece of advice here to you is to become best friends with your institution's legal counsel and IT departments, or whoever holds that kind of gatekeeping ability at your institution. These folks have been my biggest partners and allies in creating policies and procedures that help us do the work that we need to do and translate that into the online space. So things that you might want to think about with them are what policies that are student-facing need to be upheld or modified? Are there policies that we need to add? How do our current policies talk about social media and online behavior? How do we communicate changes to our students? Are there privacy concerns that we need to explore with the technology that we're choosing to use? And how do we share things that we normally would in our office that we feel like we can't or that would be difficult to do online? So really what I'm trying to cover there is, I know when I was in conduct, we would share the report with the student, but not let them take it with them. And so how might you do that online? While you may feel siloed in your work on campus sometimes, now is a time that you really need to think about how you can come together, work more cross-functionally, and not duplicate efforts. In a time that can feel chaotic and like everything is moving slow and at a full sprint at the same time, I really have been leaning on this new value and focus from our CEO, which is less but better. I encourage you to lean into that as well. While we may not be able to do everything, what can we focus on that and make it truly exceptional? I debated whether or not to keep crisis management as one of my 3 focuses today. And the reason for that is because on most campuses, while crisis can happen at any time and any place, there's a select few of us that are often called upon to work through in real time and to provide that follow-up. I kept it here because moving to an online environment does not mean the crisis goes away, it just changes. It changes in that you cannot meet a student at their classroom to escort them to another location for safety purposes. You can't knock on their door in their residence hall to check in on them and tell them to call their mom. You can't gather together to mourn when a member of the community is lost, or have counseling services on hand to check in when someone reaches out or walks out of a room during a difficult conversation. Crisis still happens when we are remote. And I know I don't have to tell you this in a time of a global crisis. Many of your policies and procedures around crisis management still apply. They just may need to be modified a little. So for example, students will still communicate that they are experiencing suicidal ideation. Just like on campus, they're either going to tell you directly or the information is going to come from a concerned friend, an instructor, or a student leader. While you may not be able to initiate a wellness check in your physical space, you still can if you know the student's address. So I've found that working with local police departments have been really, they've been really receptive and welcoming to the wellness check call. After explaining who I am, who the student is, and why I would like initiated a wellness check, I've had zero resistance, and in most cases have had a really great follow-up call with the police department. This can be difficult when you may not know the location of your student. And in those situations, I just do everything I possibly can to get them on the phone, but preferably on a Zoom call with me. In the times that we're in, you're also going to want to have a conversation with leadership level about how and when you will use emergency contacts, and if that's different because of the times we're in than you normally would when you're on campus. You're also going to want to research national and local resources. So some common things that my team works with our students on to research and get help around are local hospitals and mental health facilities, housing and shelter options, food insecurity resources, and more. And while I wish that my team didn't have to do this, we also think about how we might notify our community of a tragedy or loss of a community member and how we might provide that space to process and grieve. While coming together is important and it would be better in a physical space, you can do it online. Finally, I would encourage you to think about how you can help your colleagues. Some of you on this call have a wealth of education, experience, knowledge, and resources around crisis, trauma, counseling, difficult conversations, grief, and more. A lot of your colleagues don't have this and could really benefit from your wisdom. Think about how you can train others not to become counselors or conduct officers, Title IX coordinators, or residence life staff, but how you can help them build or be with a student or a colleague who's hurting and just needs somebody to listen. How can you help others learn to ask questions in trauma-informed ways? And how can you teach verbal de-escalation and conflict management? We're all in this together, and now more than ever need to cross the boundaries and swim in each other's lanes a bit to keep moving forward. There's a couple of things during our time where I've been a bit of a broken record, but I feel like are really important to repeat again. So number one, this is all about pivoting. You know how to do this, and you have the foundation built. You just got to think about it from a different angle. So you need to reimagine what campuses can look like right now. Just because you're not on your physical campus doesn't mean that your campus can't or your community are on pause or don't exist and they can't grow and thrive. They absolutely can. It just may not look exactly the same, and that's okay. Pivot how you think about community and find space to do less but better to bring your community together and create as much normalcy as you can. Number two, don't reinvent the wheel. Your policies and procedures are there and they're useful and they're a great foundation. So you just need to figure out how you translate that and modify them for online classrooms, social spaces, and administrative spaces. Number three, cross-functional partnerships are your friend. Utilize each other for additional training, programming and community engagement, announcements and keeping students up to date, and again, doing less but better. I have three things that I hope you will think about as you move on with your day, your week, and the upcoming months. First, explore what makes your campus or department unique. What are the ways in which you can contribute and build and engage with your community? Can you continue, modify, or create new opportunities for students to engage, learn, grow, and come together? Second, take a deep dive into policies and procedures and look at what's missing, what needs to be modified, and what is good to go. Then work with your legal counsel and IT departments to think about communication, risk, liability, and privacy. My other best friends in this game has been our marketing, PR, and comms department for the announcement piece. Third, look at your natural and unnatural partners around campus. How can you partner to do less but better? Is there space for online athletic training and workouts, guided meditations, coffee hours with a leadership team member or prominent alumni? Can you pop into classes or work with instructors to talk about academic integrity and behavior in online classrooms? Can you host a job fair or a webinar with a local business leader? I know this is a lot, and yet there's so much we can do and dive into. I kept this broad to engage the bigger student affairs umbrella, so I'm hoping that you found little nuggets that you can take with you. Thank you so much for hanging in there with me. We do have until the top of the hour for questions. So we're gonna jump over to Slido where my colleague Nicole is helping moderate. If we don't get to all of your questions or if there's some things that I need more time to answer, I'll make sure that I get them out to you after this is all done. So thank you so much. Okay, so jumping into questions, and please feel free to keep adding those in there. Do you have a full-time psychologist team? We do not on staff, not hired by Lambda. We work with a vendor called Modern Health, and they provide counseling, coaching, meditation, and other resources to our students. And so that is an app on their phone that all of our active students have access to. Hi, Jess. What are the 3 most common reasons for students dropping out of Lambda School? What do you do to minimize these happening? That is a great question. So we have similar reasons for students choosing to withdraw from Lambda School as you probably do for your institution. So things off the top of my head are things like financial situations that students are in and they may need to go find a job or find work for income. Lambda School is also really hard, and we are very much a mastery-based program, and so students may find that it is not the right fit for them, either academically or just socially in the pace of Lambda, because it is really fast, and so we have students that withdraw for that reason. I think those are the top 2 off the top of my head. I know you asked for 3, but those are the top 2. What do we do to minimize these happening? That is something that we continue to work on every single day with retention. And so coming up with support mechanisms and ways to check in with our students and be more proactive throughout their educational journey. And then going back to those resources, like we obviously can't solve all the problems. And so are there national or local resources that we can help our students find and connect to help them with those issues? So those are the things that we do there. How many students and graduates are in Lambda School? Great question. So I can provide this in a document later, but we have, if you go to our website and our blog, we have an outcomes report that we just published that talks about our H1 2019 student population and those that have gotten hired in job placement. So I would encourage you to go look at that, and I'll link to that later. All right, some student affairs departments don't have live video engagement set up. How would you recommend community building in an asynchronous way? That is a great question. Video definitely helps. And so as we move forward with this COVID-19 world and figuring out how long and the timeline for that, and we don't know, I would see with your ID department, do you have already some things you can lean into? Are there free services? I don't know if it still is, and I think it was K through 12, but I know Zoom had some kind of offer going on for services there. Are there other free things you can use? Are there options for other platforms? And then I would lean into your social media presence. I know Facebook, you can do Facebook Live, you can do Instagram Live. I am not a social media guru, so I'm not going to pretend to know all the ins and outs there, but I would just start to think creatively about what do you have access to, and how can you connect those students? Is it a Google Hangout? Is it a Facebook Live? Is there opportunities for Zoom or some limited Zoom, or other things like that? So not a full comprehensive list, but some things to think about. What are the penalties for stubborn students? Without more detail, that is a hard question to answer. Just like you all in the student affairs world and on college campuses, we have policies and procedures. We have a student guide, which is very much like a student handbook or a student code of conduct. It includes our code of conduct. And so just like colleges and universities, we have processes and procedures where if a student is reported to us for any behavioral issues, we have a process of reaching out to that student, talking with them, talking with any witnesses, things like that, and then adjudicating behavior as appropriate. It looks very, very similar to what happens in a college or university environment. How do you deal with students that are introverted and may not put themselves out there and take advantage of student success resources? That is a really good question. And I think this is something you see in college campuses as well. We definitely have those students who will always reach out. We have those students who will never reach out. And then we also have those students in between. And I don't think it's just introverted students. I think it just depends on the student, their personality, their path, their resilience, their ability to do things on their own or ask for help or feel comfortable asking for help. And so that is something that we are working more towards. So we definitely put a lot out there, and we keep reiterating the same thing over and over, like reach out to front desk or drop in something in the thread. We also encourage them to reach out to their TLs, which is their team lead, and that near peer learning workshop I was talking about next week. And that is something that we're continuing to iterate on and think about in terms of how do we go catch them. I think about it in terms of residence halls too, where you have those ghost residents where we know they live there, we've seen them a couple of times, but they're not the ones that are reaching out and engaging with us on a daily basis. And so what are the things that we can do to be proactive and not force them into engagement, but think about how do we keep just nudging to let them know that we're here if we need them. And some students are never going to reach out, and that's okay. On that note, do you use particular community building platform beyond Slack and Zoom? Slack and Zoom are our main focuses in terms of the community building. So those are the two that we use most often. We do, for some of the technical pieces, we do use Stack Overflow, and there are some community elements there as well, but our two main platforms are Slack and Zoom. Ian says, what would you say that the majority of the TLs, SLs, and instructors approach the students' needs with growth mindset? How do you help them develop that? I think we do. We talk a lot about how to ask for help. We talk a lot about learning. We talk a lot about growth. I think, could we do better? Absolutely. I think everyone can. The way that I kind of frame this for folks is that, you know, like that lifelong learning piece, like when I went to college and even in my PhD program, I'm being taught how to research. I'm being taught how to put together a research paper, but the school doesn't pick my topic. The school doesn't go pull the resources for me. The school doesn't analyze those resources. The school doesn't synthesize the information and write the paper. And so that's what I think about in terms of like how we can improve and help our students think about that growth mindset of we are giving you the tools and teaching you to learn, and going above and beyond is important, and being a lifelong learner is important, and having an active role and responsibility in your learning is really, really important. So I think we do that, and I think we can also continue to get better. How does Lambda's learning environment stimulate students' engagement? Yeah, so this is where I think our tool, and I don't think this tool will work for everybody or needs to be the tool, but we do use Slack very heavily, and we have that in our learning environment, and it stimulates engagement for a number of different ways. Number one, we have administrative spaces where we can give students announcements, give them information, but then also accept feedback and information in as well. And then we also have the learning spaces. So they have channels within Slack where they're doing their classes together. They have channels for help. They have channels for support. They have channels for, like, let's say you're an overachiever, you're doing something really exciting. We even have channels for showing off projects and showing off with each other a little bit. We also have that social side. So we have gardening channels, we have food channels, we have a random channel, we have channels that are more about support, like diversity in tech and women and those sorts of things. So we really do use those channels and that tool to build that community and encourage that space. We use that also to promote the Zoom piece. And so knowing that Slack is very much a text-oriented thing, we will drop in, so for example, our career services department, they'll drop in office hours. So here's, for the next hour and a half, I'm in office hours. Please drop your name in the thread or raise your hand, and we'll go in order, and we'll have different Zoom calls. And so they're able to go individually. We also have been doing in our career services what we call parallel play, which is very much, you've probably heard that in research around like toddlers, and we don't treat our students like toddlers, please don't hear that. But it's very much a space of like, okay, today we're gonna have parallel play around resume building. And it's really giving our students permission in their busy schedules to have that accountability. So I'm coming together, I'm choosing to put this on my schedule, I'm choosing to show up, and I'm choosing to engage with a group of students and a career coach around resume building today. So creating those spaces for our students for engagement is important for us. How do you handle when the students do not trust the team? Yeah, that's always hard. And this is something that and I'm sure many of you have worked with in student affairs too. There's always this environment in student affairs and in higher education in particular, and even outside, where there I used to tell my, sorry, I'm tripping over my words right now, but I used to tell this to my students in conduct when I was talking with them about the reports like that an RA wrote, right? I would say there's three sides to every story, right? There's your side, my side, and the truth. And I think it can be hard in student affairs and working with students because we don't always get to tell our story. And that's legit. Like, that's not something we're ever going to change, right? Because we want to protect privacy of our students, privacy of our staff, and it's just not appropriate to always share information. And so for me, it's always about fine tuning and getting better and being transparent where we can, when we can, which doesn't always land with everybody, and that's okay, and we have to deal with that. So for me, it's about building trust in any way that we possibly can, whether it's in Slack, whether it's in Zoom. I'm prone to like jumping on a Zoom call with someone rather than talking over Slack, because I think so much is lost in translation over text, and having that face-to-face, even if it's not in a physical space, having that face-to-face interaction can be important so that people see that these are humans that care and want you to succeed and genuinely are here working hard for you. All right, sometimes the student is frustrated and addresses all the responsibility on the school methodology. How do you deal with that? I think that's a difficult question to answer fully, because I think it goes back to that question I just answered, around we can't always share everything. It's not appropriate, it's not ethical, and so there will be frustration. That's part of this. That's part of the learning process. And depending on where a student is at in their development, and I guess I think about this differently too as a conduct person, because I was often the person getting blamed for things. And the way that I think about that is, I understand personally that it's not about me, and that they're working through some things and they need somebody to blame right now or something to blame. And so for me, it's about how can I put a drop in the bucket? How can I help them move forward and help support them and hear them? I am very much a believer of often perception is reality. And while our perceptions and realities may not be the same, it doesn't invalidate your thoughts and feelings. And so for me, it's about being with a student in that space. But for me, it's about being able to look in the mirror and say, did I do everything I possibly can? And did I follow our policies and procedures? Did I do what's right by my institution and the community as well? And that often ends up with not everyone being happy all the time. And that's okay. That's where we're at. So something that I think everyone can always continue to get better at. But that's how I approach it, is how can I be with that student? How can I hear their feelings and really, really hear them, and be with them in that space, but know that they still may be frustrated. Any recommendations on scaling new hire, like your TL's training, to help out students in an online environment that they don't already have, if they don't already have that experience? Yeah, this is actually, I can get you an answer on this. I don't want to answer this. This is not my area at Lambda, but I will get you that answer, Sahil. And that is something I would really encourage you to look. We have an Eventbrite registration open for Britt Tedeschi's presentation next week. She is our expert and our head of student leadership, which is our TL and SL program. And so I don't want to misspeak there. I would lean on her for that expertise. And so I would encourage you to look at that, and I will get you that information as well. How do you support learners who are not vocal about the battling but performing progressively lower than the average without overstepping? Yeah, I think this goes back to what we talked about a little bit before, in terms of there are always going to be those students who are not as vocal and not leaning into the resources that we have. And so this is where I think some of you all do this really well on campuses, where you have early alert systems. and figuring out who is the right person to reach out to that student. And so that's something that we're also developing as well, in terms of what tools and resources do we have to alert us early on, as early as possible, that a student isn't doing well. And that can come in obviously from a lot of different areas. That can come in from academic performance, that can come in from attendance, that can come in from their student leaders or coworkers or co-students, sorry, or other staff or instructors. And so for me, it's all about relating this back to the student affairs world. I think about this in terms of like the RA, right? So the RA knows them, and we can just say, hey, Jess, do you mind checking in on this person and just see how they're doing? And so just trying to gently approach, as in like a check-in, how are you doing? How are things going? And then trying to work into that conversation. I think just being gentle and open, and then pointing to resources as necessary. We also try to reiterate this with our students regularly in terms of the resources we have available, like Modern Health, of like, hey, remember, this is available. This is a hard time. And if you haven't thought about reaching out, it's still available. You can still go in there. Please let us know if you have any questions. And just trying to make ourselves available to help them in any way that we can. All right. Do you have any advice about conducting polls or otherwise collecting feedback from students in a remote setting? Yeah, this is something that we're continuing to fine tune. Right now, we do use Slack for this. We have every day and every week, we have forms that our students fill out. So we call our daily assignments daily modules. And then at the end of the week on Fridays, we have what we call a sprint challenge, which is kind of like that test that they take at the end to think about mastery for that week. And we have forms that students fill out as they submit their projects for those days and those weeks. And we ask for feedback in there. We're also trying to develop a cadence and some more intentional student satisfaction type surveys like you do in higher education. So we do that. And I think the typical ways that you collect feedback is probably still appropriate and can be modified for the online setting. I would just maybe think about, since you can't put up those posters around campus or have those tabling events or things like that, I would just think about how do you do that in a way that gets you in front of students and thinking about it rather than just an email that might get lost in their inbox. How do you deal with mental health issues in addition to providing psychological support? So yeah, so we do have a channel that our students can join. It's all of our channels outside of the academic things are opt-in. And we do have a channel where students do discuss mental health and support one another through that. And there's a mix of staff and instructors and students in that channel. And no one's offering obviously any counseling advice. We point students to Modern Health if they don't have insurance or if they don't have someone they've been working with prior to Lambda. But there are a lot of things like resources being shared and support and just even pick-me-ups throughout the day for folks. And just having real conversation about how they're working through the stress, because like I said, Lambda is very fast-paced and it is a very rigorous curriculum. And is mastery based as well. So students do feel that. And so there is a great community in our Slack channel helping each other out on that. How do you enable key employees who themselves have not been doing well to the crisis and consequently are unable to support learners? Yeah, this is that collaboration cross-functional piece and the training that I talked about. So myself and a couple colleagues put together a training document with resources and videos and articles around trauma, around crisis, about how people respond, about there's no one right way to respond. And so keeping that a space where people could come in and explore, because at Lambda School, there's a handful of us that have worked in higher education or education before, and there's a lot who haven't. And so really it's about meeting folks where they're at and helping them to just start to learn about, like, how might I practice active listening? How might I ask questions in a way that are not blaming, or how do I not should on people? And how do I keep that conversation going? So we've done that through trainings and offering resources, and then just being kind again to one another. Students are going to handle this differently, and so are our coworkers and us. And so just being realistic about where you're at and leaning on each other's strengths. I know for me, like when it comes to crisis, and I don't know if this is just me personally or my res life and conduct training, but like being a first responder to a crisis, I go into go mode. I can stay calm, cool, and collected. I can compartmentalize and I can get the job done, and others can't. And that's okay. And so just knowing where each of you can step in and where you need to step back is really important. And if you're someone who needs to step back, how can we help those folks do that in a way that's not off-putting to colleagues and students? So is there a way to help coach them in terms of like, I can't handle this right now. Here's who can. Let me get you in contact with them. Is there a gentle way for that handoff to happen rather than a student or a colleague feeling not important or not heard? What would you say has been the single most crucial intervention measure that Lambda has taken in the last year to ensure that students feel supported? I think in terms, like the way that you've worded it, Ian, the most crucial intervention measure, I think, is adding modern health, to be honest with you. Prior to that, there was not any mental health or support services in terms of that therapist coach type thing. We have our typical people, but obviously like me and my team, we are not trained psychologists and counselors, and nor do we pretend to be. And so I think adding modern health has really helped our students feel supported in us acknowledging as a company, you know, this is hard and you're going through hard things. And many of our students are not working while going to Lambda. And so they may not have insurance or access to mental health providers. And so I think that is probably the most crucial partnership and measure that we've put into place with our students. Do you collect any student data to be able to help support students better? Can you talk about what kind of data you look at? Yeah. I think we, just like student affairs and just like universities out and colleges out there, I think we collect very similar data. We just may, I guess, look at it a little bit more comprehensively. I know, and I say that not to assume what your institution looks like, but in my past roles, I may not see all of the academic things, or I may not see their extracurricular activity. You know, I may only see conduct records. I may only see basic for academic. And so we use some of those same triggers to help support our students. So we're looking at their grades, we're looking at attendance, we're looking at behavioral issues and escalations there. We're looking at how they're doing on assignments in terms of the career assignments that are happening, how they're interacting with staff members, how they're interacting on group projects. So very, very similar data that you would be looking at your institution as well. And then what are suggestions regarding follow-up that just won't have it online? Suggestions regarding student follow-up. I'm not sure I fully understand that question. Yeah, whoever wrote that, if you could just ping that and then maybe we can answer that. Do you have to handle supporting students differently given their prior educational backgrounds, including online like this? No, I don't. I mean, obviously every individual is different and their needs for support are different. But I think the only thing I'm thinking about in terms of like their prior educational backgrounds, we do have students who have degrees and multiple degrees, and we have students who are just out of high school, and we have students who have their GEDs, and we have students who are coming back after long careers and not being in school. So we have students really all over the map in terms of their prior educational background. And I think obviously we need to think about that differently in terms of, you know, what someone who's in their 60s and coming back after a long career and now jumping back into school, obviously their needs may be different. But I think what I see with those different populations is not so much a difference in support, but it's really that individual, because some of our folks that are coming back after careers are offering a lot of really good support to each other and to our students in terms of they know what the workforce looks like, they know what it's like to be in a job and be in a professional environment and job search and have conflict on a team. And so I find that they're all supporting each other. And really what we're trying to do is just work to support our students in any way that we possibly can, regardless of their prior educational background. Okay, so, Let's see. Have you had cases where the learners weren't receptive to mental health support and failed to recognize whether or not something needed altering? Yes, yes, as you probably have in your role as well. We do have, I mean, just like any other institution, we have students who are not receptive to mental health support, and obviously that's not something we're going to force on anyone. And so that is something where we can ask, have they, have you reached out to Modern Health, or have you downloaded the app? Do you know that it's there? And we can continue to keep suggesting that, but we're not going to force it or feel like we're forcing it on anyone. And just like you, we have, there's various different reasons for that. Some of it could be cultural, familial, personal, maybe personal experience in the past. And so, yeah, we definitely do have folks that are not receptive to that. And we do have folks who fail to recognize whether something needs altering. So I don't know if you're going this direction with it, but the direction I read that question is, do we have, students who may not recognize that their behavior is something that needs altering, and outside of the mental health arena. So we have students obviously who think that they are working just fine in teams and in groups and in pairs, or responding well to staff or other students. And obviously there's coaching and conversations that happen there around correction of behavior. We do have what we call student success plans that we'll work with students on. Student success plan is kind of a catch-all, and is a very broad term. In some senses, it has to do with academic integrity. In some senses, it has to do with behavioral issues. And then in some other ways, it's just a general student success plan of like, how do we get you back on track and how do we get you moving forward? How does Lambda prevent assignment fraud considering the online environment? Good question. So we have, just like you probably do, have academic integrity policies, and what it means to copy. I think it's hard, right, especially in the online environment, because we're not there with the students, but we do definitely catch, and our instructors and our TLs catch when someone has plagiarized and copied others or has used other students' materials before. So the way that we try to prevent this is to have our policies in place and have our students educated around them, and our instructors do cover those as well, and we do cover that in our orientation, and then we really just react when we need to, and we keep an eye on those things that are happening. We try to really talk about integrity and try to make sure that students understand this is a professional environment, and that this impacts future jobs. And so let's treat this like a professional environment. Let's practice with that. And in the tech world, that can be really hard because as we talk about asking for help, we talk about going to Google and finding resources and helping troubleshoot answers, but there's a fine line between finding the answers and really asking for help and developing your own answers. So that's how we try to prevent all of that. All right, we have 2 more minutes left. If there are any last minute questions, I am happy to answer them. Otherwise, I do have a note to get the TLSL question. And please, again, look at that webinar that Britt's doing next week. Are student success plans similar to individualized education plans in your context? No. So when I think of IEPs, I think of accommodations. And so they are very different. We do work with students around ADA reasonable accommodations, but student success plans, if you're thinking of it in terms of like, getting resources and supporting students with like time management, crisis management, resilience, technical skills, those sorts of things, like we use it for that. And so if we have a student, let's say, who has some behavioral and professionalism issues, that student success plan will be tailored to how do we get you to understand our expectations around professionalism, and what are some tangible ways that you can show us that you are moving forward in a positive direction there. So they are separate from ADA. I hope that answers your question. Okay. All right, so thank you so much for those on the West Coast taking your lunch hour with me, and for those everywhere else taking time. I really appreciate it. Please, again, my email is Jessica.Pense, Pense, @lambdaschool.com. So please feel free to reach out and email me if you have any further questions. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. Bye.